Hi everybody, welcome to our Chapter 3 lecture for Budgets and Financial Management in Higher Education. We're going to be looking at Chapter 3, which is Understanding Budgets. So my opinion is this is the chapter that really pulls together the first two chapters in the course. I block these ones together. 1, 2, and 3 are tied together. 4 standalone. I've used 4 in regular classes, but I've used it in every time I've taught finance. I've used something very similar to Chapter 4. I think it's an important one, and I think it's a big idea. It's also kind of why I isolated it a little bit. And 5, 6, and 7 are similar as well. This really goes into understanding what budgeting represents in higher education, what it is, in what the structure of budgeting and budgeting systems are in higher education. So one of the big ideas is that we've talked about schools and organizations being not-for-profit. Obviously there's such thing as a for-profit college and a for-profit school, but for the most part we're admitting and we're accepting the fact that schools are not-for-profit. So when we're doing anything related to budgeting, let's see if I can try this better, maybe we'll make it a little darker in here, this will come out nice. Anytime we're doing anything with schools and anytime we're doing anything with schools and budgets, we're looking at it for putting business strategy into operation, allocating resources, providing incentives, giving control, and finding it as a way for communication to internal and external audiences. That last one is really important because even though this is something that you're doing and you're using, it is important that you communicate it to an internal and an external audience so they know what to expect from the budget and they can make their own decisions on it. So I really spend a lot of time, if this was a face-to-face course, discussing what not-for-profit means. For the sake of this class, know that the majority of colleges and the majority of organizations are not-for-profit. You interpret that as you want, determine what that means to you, but know that colleges are supposed to be not-for-profit and they operate as not-for-profit. So when you're putting business strategy into operation, the most important parts of any budgets are any daily routine institutional costs. Those stay the same. They're transparent. Everybody knows what they are, and they're going to be consistent not just in colleges, they're going to be consistent in businesses, they're going to be consistent just across any organizations. When higher education budgets have a higher balance, then they get flexibility to increase spending, and normally they hire people. The idea is knowing whether or not the positive or negative balance will be there next year or spending. This is an interesting state, and you have to understand the context of this state in kind of the mandatory but not mandatory, forced but not forced retirement system here. It is highly, highly, highly encouraged in this state that you retire, excuse me, it's been a long day, but you retire after 30 years of service. That is the magic number here in what we're expecting people to leave and retire. It's where your pension is maximized. Can you come back after retirement? Yes, but you enter a period where you kind of commit to retiring, and that's called your drop period. And that's very big throughout the state. When higher education institutions know this is going to happen, they get flexibility to increase spending in the form of personnel or in the form of physical resources. So most of the time, people in higher education have ideas. Everybody has big ideas and they want this program or that program to work and it's just glorious and we need this program at the organization. But most of the time, these are all just exactly what they sound like. They're really, really, really good ideas. You have more ideas and more things that the organization or the institution can handle, and that's really common. Tough decisions have to be made that impact the institution. Most of the time in this state and across the United States, the undergraduate programs actually come first in terms of funding and design because you're committing the students to being there for 4 years, and most of the time we all know that college students don't get done in 4 years for their undergraduate. So you're committing your funding to strong undergraduate programs and then doctoral level programs before other graduate programs. Most institutions, the doc program is the crown jewel of the organization. And in higher education, that's important and that's a big idea. So most of the time, our our departments in higher education spend all their money at the end of the year, so there's no excess left over. I am in disagreement with the authors, and I think you should do this. I strongly caution saving money in higher education. My reasoning for this is if you can effectively show that you save money, when you're fighting with all of these different departments and all these different pools, and you're trying to grab money, and the humanities department wants this, and the foreign language department wants this, and the engineering department wants this, you spend your money in higher education. Public education, if you can kind of, K-12, if you can kind of pocket it, and you know that you have a strategic plan of what's going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years, like we've been talking about in here, that's different. But in higher education, I think the opposite. I think you spend it. Sometimes there are incentives for keeping a balance, but I say you spend your money in higher ed because you have to make smart decisions, and knowing that the majority of your money is going to be devoted to your tenure track faculty members, you have to keep that in mind. A lot of this course is going to talk about who has control of the budget in higher education. In all honesty, this differs depending on the institution. Some are centralized, some are structured at the department level, some are based on the number of full-time students and then provided departmentally. That notion of full-time students is huge when you're looking at funding in graduate school. One of the reasons why every state really stresses that every graduate student should take 6 credits a term is because it qualifies you for full-time student status and full-time funding. It's just like for undergrads, they want you to take, I think it's 10.5 credits now. If you're taking 10.5 credits, you're considered a full-time student. It used to be 12. I remember they've lowered it in the last few years. That gives you an incremental based funding opportunity if you are under that structure and the state is providing money to you based on the number of full-time students you have. If you end up in higher education administration, you have to find an institution that departmentalizes the budget, because then you have control and you have power. If you have power and you can recruit your own students and you can build your program and you can take 20 or 25 students, then you can pay and you can afford another full-time faculty member. And that's huge, and that's a big idea. You have to determine how you want to communicate the budget. Private institutions can keep the budget private as much as they want to. Public institutions do not have a choice, and they have to make them public. They have to be 100% transparent on where the money is going, what the money is doing. Private institutions can or cannot. If you are ever in a leadership position, even if you are at a private institution, I say open books. If you want to look at an interesting case study, go to August 2015 and look up all the financial woes that Cheney College had to deal with, because it was insane. And they didn't keep their budget transparent, and if they would have, it would have made a difference. But it's worth it for you to take a read of kind of their situation and what they experienced. You will find 4 types of budgets in higher education, and this is different than P12. You'll find operating, capital, auxiliary, and special fund budgets. Auxiliary and special funds are different. Operating and capital, I can tell you the same thing you're getting out of money in schools you're getting out of this book, because it's going to be very similar. But auxiliary and special fund are different. Operating, it's the same that you find. It's income from all sources. In higher education, though, they have something called reserve funds. Money's there for emergencies. It's been set aside. It's put in reserve if a program would be cut and you need to grandfather the program in. You have to finish off the students. You can pull from a reserve fund. Most of the time, the operating year impacts the budget. It's normally July 1st through June 30th or September 1st through August 30th in higher education. Most of the places that I've worked at, it's July 1st through June 30th, but I've seen September 1st through August 30th at some places as well. Capital budgets, most of the time these are renovation expenditures, replacement of equipment, transportation services, facilities, wireless access, yada, yada, yada. I mean, honestly, this is exactly the same as it is in K-12. I'm giving you nothing different because it's capital expenditures. It's the same. It's the same as if it would be in a business. This is the same. But this can also be things like desk replacement, this whole concept of this ergonomic standing desk office replacement. That can also be something as well. Auxiliary budgets we talk about a lot in Chapter 5 of the textbook. These are things that are fully self-supported in higher education and receive no funding. Things like food services, an outside company providing to a university, campus housing, sometimes medical services. I'm going to go in depth on these because most of the time these are different types of budgets because it's students that are in a program, in a dental program, in a restaurant management program, in a hotel travel tourism program, and they're actually doing these things. So they're self-supported, they're not funded, and the people are making money and they're living the experiences themselves. Special funds budgets are exclusive to higher ed. They're things like grants, endowments, scholarships, student support programs. Obviously you have these in K-12, but you all know you don't have these in K-12 to the level that you have them in higher education. Most of the time this is federal funding that's just given to the state, redistributed, and then it's put into special funds budget and then given to the institution from the state. So the textbook gives some examples of how to organize budgets. My idea really is you have to see a budget to understand the budget. Each organization budgets differently and organizes differently, and it just really depends on where you're working. I think it's important that you know what the models are, you know what the models look like so you can see them, but you have to understand that every single organization is going to do them differently. But there are 8 models, and like we normally do in here, I will give you the list of the 8 models, and we're going to talk about each one. So here are your 8 models that you see that are common across the United States and institutions of higher education. So the all funds budgeting model really looks into account all sources of revenue and expenses and considers everything as opposed to just saying it's not operating, it's not capital, it's not auxiliary in special funds. Large institutions cannot do this. Your large, giant schools, your top 25, your top 50 schools, they cannot use this model because you're throwing everything into a pot and then you're saying, okay, this goes here, and you're not distinguishing what's capital, what's special. Imagine what you would do at a large, giant school. Smaller schools, you can do this and you can use this, and it puts everything together and distributes it equitably. This is the model that you will probably see. This is formula-based budgeting. This is when we say that one particular concept is more significant than the other. It relies on certain criteria in allocating resources. The institution has certain higher priorities and they assign values based on that, but it can be manipulated. Somebody can say, my program is more important than the other one. This is a doc program versus a master's level program, therefore we put more money into this. And that's a difficult issue in higher education. So incremental is what I like to call traditional union-based budgeting. It's either the all increase or all decrease by a certain percentage. It's fair. This is good because we're going to give each program a 2% increase or a 3% decrease. It's very fair. But if you believe that some programs are more important than others, you won't be in support of this, and this is going to be a major cut across budgets and across programs. So the initiative-based budgeting really gives you, the purpose of portions of the budgets being returned for new initiatives. So if you have something that starts strong, that you overexceed and you overdo, and it doesn't go by the wayside, that can be a good thing. So to give you an example of that, when an institution normally starts a new master's program or a doctoral program, the first group that goes through, the first anything, and this is across the United States, they're probably over-recruited, over-selected, over-picked. It's highly, highly, highly competitive. They'll start strong, and then it'll eventually go by the wayside. And we all know of programs like that that exist. Eventually they level off and they stabilize. But there's going to be a lot more money that comes into the beginning. You set it aside, it's an initiative, and then you can use it to maybe ramp up recruiting efforts when recruiting dies down. I've seen this at every place that I've ever worked in. So performance-based budgeting, you're going to see a lot of this in terms of CAPE and NCAPE more than anything else. You're gonna see if you've attained a certain performance measure, you get a certain amount of money, but it depends on the level of accreditation that the organization picks. The issue that you have with this that I've seen, and it's been a controversial issue that you can read about in the Chronicle, sometimes, occasionally, people will pick a model that they know is going to work and they know is going to be successful for the institution. That way that they know that they can work into the system and get the most money that they can on performance-based budgeting. So you have to make sure that you're actually doing performance-based budgeting. If it's working to its advantage, that's what you want it to be. So The planning, programming, and budgeting system, both textbooks are really stressing this idea. It's fairly new, and it's something that we're going to see a lot more. It's monitoring performance, giving money where it's needed. If you avoid taking risks, you're rewarded for doing it. It's really tied to finding an appropriate model of performance and measuring it and assessing that model of performance. So, responsibility-based budgeting, it's done at an outside source or center, but it's subject to political issues as well and issues of equity. You want to have someone with strong experience in budget managing running the center, or else that can be a massive issue and massive political problem as well. Imagine if you were in the anthropology department and you relied on travel money to go to conferences and to go overseas to do actual research, and somebody at the responsibility center is the one that's giving you that money. Well, they might not know what your program is, and they might not know what the program's strengths are and what the program's weaknesses are, and that can be an issue and that can be a problem as well. So that is an important consideration. Every item in the budget must be justified and developed when you do zero-based budgeting. This is basically saying, we're doing nothing to start. We're saying everything has to be justified. We're going to itemize everything. The anxiety and waiting when dealing with human capital issues is awful in this system. So does it work? Can you use it? Yes, but it's something that can really cause people a lot of challenges. The other issue that you have is whether or not it's going to be a centralized budgeting decision or decentralized. Our authors really talk about the fact that we have hybrid models now, and maybe some of those models can have different elements. Some are programs, some are certification areas that can be decentralized. Some staffing has to be centralized, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about staffing in the next chapter. So if it's a centralized approach, all decisions regarding the budget are institutional. And the priorities are there, they set goals, they make decisions, and you can allocate resources when resources are more difficult to come by. Everything is permission-based in this model. It keeps everything controlled at the institutional level, not department level, but the institution can make the decisions and distributes the money. They can allocate resources when they need to, and if there's a funding error or funding issue, then the institution takes control of it. So, decentralized approach gives it to the different programs. The problem with this is it's competition based, and yes, people think you're playing favorites when you do this. There are issues when people don't want to make decisions and don't want to hurt people, and if you do it at the institutional level, there's always somebody to blame and always somebody to say that you couldn't get the funding that you needed because the institution couldn't do it. It's not putting it on somebody, but it's difficult because you're dealing with competition. Imagine managing an education department where you have an early childhood program, a middle school program, a secondary program, and determining how you balance it. The hybrid approach, really, it's the preferred decision. Central budget managers can provide information to unit managers. They can say what's available, and then the unit managers can make the decision. Your department chairs, your program coordinators, whatever you want to call them, they make the decisions in terms of how the money is distributed. So this was an important chapter. We're going to look at how we manage the budgeting cycle. If I can do anything else to help, let me know. But this chapter was a really good overview of kind of what that process looked like, and what the different models are and how they pertain to higher education. So hope you got something out of it. Thank you.